the camera been on?
Absolutely.
Good.
Absolutely.
My mic was on.
I'd do it if I could.
All right. It being 7 o'clock, I hereby call to order this meeting of the Kenmore Planning Commission. First item on the agenda is citizen comment. There being no citizens in the council chambers to render comment, we have satisfied this element of the agenda. Next item on the agenda is approval of the December 6, 2016 Planning Commission meeting minutes. Do I hear a motion to amend or approve? Actually, I'm going to move to amend. The minutes say, bear with me. Paragraph 1. Middle of the paragraph. Chair Nugent earlier had emailed the Planning Commission and staff his concerns and requested recommendations on the logistics of oral presentation. I'm fine with that. And then it says, he also asked to extend the timetable to address these concerns. However, it was determined by the commissioners that this was not necessary. So I wanted to add to that. I mean, I think it's accurate, but I think it's incomplete. So I wanted to replace that sentence with, Chair Nugent stated that the staff had provided only Arch as an advisor to the commission on this topic. Chair Nugent restated his concern that other perspectives were needed to provide a balanced analysis to the City Council. In light of that, Chair Nugent suggested that either additional meetings be held with advisors from other sectors of the housing issues, or that his written concerns be provided to the Council in conjunction with the staff's memo. The commissioners agreed to include many of Chair Nugent's concerns in the staff memo. So that is my proposed amendment. Do I hear a second?
Second.
Okay. All in favor of the minutes as amended, raise your hand and say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All opposed, raise your hand and say nay. All abstaining, raise your hand and say abstain. There being none, the minutes are hereby approved as amended. And Bridget, I wrote it out, so you don't have to. I'll make it easy on you. All right. What's that? Yeah, and it was a little lengthy, so I didn't want her to have to go back over the tape. Next item on the agenda, housing strategy plan. I invite to the presentation table the city staff and their consultants.
Good evening, Planning Commission, and Happy New Year to you all.
Thank you.
Ready to start 2017. So, on your agenda tonight is the housing strategy plan, and that incorporates the comments that were made from the last meeting. So, the goal for this evening is to ask any questions on that material that's in front of you, and hopefully be ready to agree that this is your document to provide to council. Right now, the joint meeting of the council is scheduled for January 23rd. So if you are able to agree on a recommendation and you have time to also start a pre-meeting meeting, how you'd like to move back to what after presentation to council on the 23rd. If you do not have time, you could do that on the 17th. Currently, do not have any of the work program items to work on yet because the council does not approve the document until January 23rd. So I say that you could do this on the 17th, you could do it tonight, So, in light of that, we don't really have a presentation this evening because we haven't been in front of you, basically, as a staff to respond to any questions or any amendments that need to be made to the information we have on council. The information that was on the dais in front of you was some information that Chair Nugent had requested about the Arch Trust Fund, project of economy of character and some other data which is not directly relevant to the housing strategy in front of you, but it's background information. That's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Debbie. So I do have some comments on the proposed memo draft, but I'm opening the floor to others who may have others. Dennis?
Mine may be more editorial, but I think when we start the bullet points in the background section, probably need to be a little more forceful. The sentence that reads, in addition to the council's direction, the commission identified.
What do you propose?
I propose something like, the commission's deliberations identified several material factors affecting the development of its strategy plan. I don't necessarily think that we just sort of add-ons and outside the guidance that we're given. I think they're inherent in the complexity of the issue.
Okay. Do you have some factors that you want to bring up?
Well, then go into the bullet points.
Okay.
I just thought we should have a more forceful introductory phrase.
Okay. So I think you're saying it would read, in addition to the council's direction, the commission identified several material factors that they used in preparing the strategy plan.
I was actually not, I was going to delete the whole thing.
Okay?
And then I will restate what I was
Please.
proposing. The commission's deliberations identified several material factors affecting the development of its strategy plan. I don't think they were necessarily in addition.
Okay. I'm fine with it. Any other objections?
No.
Okay. Thank you, Dennis. Anybody else? Mark?
Well, I had some editorial, are we just going to kind of randomly go bounce back and forth? Is that all right, or do we have a?
I don't have a plan. I do have a number of points to raise, but I
Can
don't.
we just close this out rather than leave them all sort of hanging? Because they won't know what we've done or not done.
You want to vote on it, you mean?
I think so.
Yeah. So on your proposal, you move to make that change?
I
Okay. I second. Any objections? Any discussions, I should say? No discussion? Okay, all in favor of the motion, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say nay. Abstain, say abstain. There being none, motion carries. Right. Mark, do you want to step in?
Okay. Again, most of these are editorial, but I did have a few. On page 1, in the second paragraph, the second to last sentence is kind of confusing. I think there may be some words or phrases missing. It says, the main component of the strategy plan have characterized this as a menu. It seems like there's something missing. I don't know what you had in mind, but
Mark, do you mean after a menu, a menu of?
no. I think between strategy plan and have characterized, it doesn't.
May I? Yes, I think in the process of writing and editing, we left out, attached to the memo is a matrix that is the main component of the strategy plan, period. Commissioners have characterized.
There you
this.
go.
I think that's what was there before.
There you go.
I don't have it in front of me.
Okay. Got that. Okay. I also thought in this second paragraph, and this is maybe a little less in the way of sort of editing than and just a point of emphasis, I think I would like to see the word affordability a little higher up. I mean, I know it's a housing strategy plan as kind of defined before, but I was, and I know it's down there at the bottom, but I was thinking we could add at the first sentence in the second paragraph after the word to consider, and then comma, focused on housing affordability. I just think we need to be even clearer that that's really what we're trying to accomplish here.
Mark, can you tell me which paragraph again you're in?
Yeah, it's the second paragraph on the first page, the first sentence that reads, the strategy plan prioritizes a variety of potential strategies for Kenmore to consider.
And what did you want to add?
Comma, focused on housing affordability, because that's really what we were. I don't see the word affordability until the bottom of the second paragraph in the introduction, and I just think it needs to be called out earlier, is my opinion. I know later on it goes, it explains more about that, but if we're talking about the introduction.
Well, for what it's worth, I had thought this is rather long, and the introduction's rather long. And I know from my early days as a lawyer, I was told judges call this throat clearing. A lot of throat clearing here. And my thought was we should first state what the council instructed us to do. And it takes until the background section, second sentence, to get to that. Starting with, in April of this year, the City Council directed the Planning Commission to draft and recommend a housing strategy plan in accordance with the implementation strategies of the comp plan. Council also provided guidance that the strategy plan should emphasize affordable housing strategies. So I don't see the benefit of the first two paragraphs. I think we want to, if it were up to me, I would go right to what they instructed us to do, and then it gets into what we've considered in making our recommendations. This whole memo is 9 pages. Now, my sense is it could be much, much shorter and still make the same points. I have to wonder how much of this the council members are going to read or want to read. If we could, I think our odds are much better if we make it simpler and shorter. So that would sort of override what you're proposing anyway, and it gets right to the question.
Address what I was.
Yeah, it would address in a more. What's that? Go ahead. Okay. Anybody want to comment on that? Yeah. Whether it's sufficient. Mike, did you raise your hand?
I think it's a valid point. I don't have any inclusion or exclusion comments myself, but I think that is not a bad starting point.
Mike?
You probably have.
And to that end, Doug, I
Yeah.
think your comment falls within that approach of, are there not, maybe a great place to start, Debbie, is, have we missed anything? Having gone through that conversation, then secondly, is there anything in here we could exclude in the interest of brevity and concise writing?
Right, and that's a good point. I think the thing we missed is some of what we just got tonight. And we, as I said at the last meeting and in the document I sent around before the last meeting, I think it's important to tell the council who's been advising us on this, what their role is in this issue, affordable housing. So the day after that meeting, I looked on their website and I saw they have a housing trust fund. And I don't remember that coming up in our meeting, and so I looked into it more and I asked the staff, can you tell me more about this? And that's what we have here. It's what this housing trust fund is. So in the memo, my sense was at the last meeting, yes, we should explain to the council who ARCH is, what they do, what their interest is in this issue. And we have it in a footnote on page 2. And I think it's kind of buried there, and there's no reference to that housing trust fund. And here's why I think that's important. And I think Dennis and Mike might, as lawyers, be more familiar with this than most. There are a lot of rules about lawyers and the role they can play when they represent a client. And conflicts of interest are a big part of that. If I were hired to do, as a lawyer, what ARCH was hired to do for this commission, I would have broken a vast majority of those rules, and I'll tell you why. Arch is not just getting some kind of compensation for their service here. As I understand, they're compensated for providing service to the city. But they're getting donations from the city. That's what this trust fund seems to be. So if I had a financial interest that would be affected by the advice that I gave my client, it would taint the credibility of my advice. So that's fine that Arch has a role in this. I think, as I've said many times, I think other elements of the housing industry and the housing issue should have a role in this. But at the very least, we should point these out to the council. So there's no mention of this pecuniary interest that Arch has in the advice that it's giving to the commission. And I'd like that to be pretty clear in this memo.
With respect, though, I know that's your position. I know the council is fully aware of what Arch is doing and how the city contributes to the housing trust fund. I have not had any conflict. I don't think there is a conflict, first of all. So we've had this discussion at the last meeting. I think Martha clearly outlined what those are, the relationship with the city, and whether you have a different perspective or not. That it is what it is, and I don't think the council shares the perspective. I don't think, to be frank, it's quite relevant providing recommendations to the council, in my opinion.
Okay, I hear you. Anybody have any other response to this or concern about this?
I am not sure if I am highly concerned about it, but I do think that it is a fair and appropriate disclosure to make, even though they may know it from the many years of contact. You don't know what they really know, and you don't know whoever might read this document, what they will know. It could be just the general public. They
Right.
won't have years of it.
Anybody else? Mark?
Yeah, I pretty much agree with Dennis. I don't have probably the same kind of concerns you have, but I do think it should be more than a footnote. I would say it should be more visibly stated for not just for the council, but for the other, the citizens and others who may read. I think that's a valid point.
Right. So, and I feel like here's this product. It represents us, the commission, and we're relying on Arch almost exclusively. And for it not to be disclosed, I personally would not be at all comfortable presenting that to the council or to the public as my work product without making that disclosure. And I think the council can decide for itself, as Debbie says, if they're all quite familiar with this and otherwise not bothered by it, that's fine. But I couldn't begin to hand a product like this to either my client or the court without making this kind of disclosure. Even if it weren't violating 10 rules of conflicts of interest in the rules of professional conduct, my conscience won't allow it. So that's why I'm, I guess, putting this much emphasis on it. The other thing is the footnote itself doesn't mention the Housing Trust Fund. It does have language that could be construed to refer to financial support that it gets from cities, and then I think just disperses to homeowners or renters. Well, this is why I asked the questions, Arthur. So to know exactly what this trust fund does, how it works, who's getting the money, who's giving the money, who's the whole bit. Because it's been very, I think, concealed up to this point.
So, if I could try to clarify.
Yeah.
Arch is not a legal entity. We are an interlocal agency that does not even exist as a legal entity. The money is not Arch's. It's a system that is part of what the city's created to help them in administering resources when they want to use those for affordable housing. So what the city council does is they decide on front of their budget, all the cities do this, how much
Who's, you said Nancy Owsley is a trustee on the Arch Board, or the trustee on this trust?
She sits on the Arch Executive Board.
She's the city's representative to the board.
And the Executive Board, again, they don't take any final action because everything has to go back to city councils for their action.
For how much they contribute?
They ask the question again.
Yeah, so what are the cities deciding? I know they must decide how much they contribute to this trust fund every year. That's what this is, right?
And then
This
we develop
chart?
a list of projects. So those projects, every one of those projects, what's one of the unique elements is multiple cities will fund the same project. The executive board, through the advisory board, comes up with recommendations on which project should be funded, conditions, and on which city contribute. That then goes back to every city council, and the city council votes on their piece of funding for each individual project. Something relatively unique within the funding world, where we actually, because our system looks a little differently, we wanted to make sure that it was very clear that it's the city's money, and the cities are making their final decisions on how they're funding these.
And then you disperse the money?
We do a contract, just like staff has, somebody has to draft a contract, it's still City of Kenmore's money.
Yeah.
And their contract, we now have a new system where 10 cities sign the same contract essentially, with system, but it's based on the council decision. Yeah, it's a very unique situation that was created by the cities many years ago.
Who's the trustee of this trust?
We need a trustee.
Every trust has a trustee. Every trust has a benefit.
Our funds are held by the city of Bellevue as one of the public members of the organization. Funds can only be released upon council authorization. No funds can ever leave and go to an individual project without council.
You're saying you have a trust without a trustee.
It's not a
It's called a trust.
terminology people understand as trust are putting things together. It's a fund that is funded by individual cities. The funds are held by the city of Bellevue, and the funds can only be released upon authorization of individual councils for individual projects.
Can I contribute something?
Yeah, please.
You know, when the King County Growth Management Act was enacted
The Washington.
for Washington, to counteract the fact that the people who were managing King County in that capacity, they were appointed people, right? They weren't elected officials.
I don't know which board you're talking about.
Okay, so the King County Growth Management Act and the King County Council, who administers following those guidelines, those are not elected officials. Those are appointed by people who are elected. So what the cities did to be able to give the citizens an opportunity to have people who are in the decision-making capacity to comply with those laws is they also created entities, and you can look at this in the Green Spaces Act, private lands that are held for trust, like on Vashon Island. If you go throughout the whole King County and you look at all these different places that were impacted by these growth management laws, you will find that groups of people organized themselves so that they could have elected officials comply with those laws. So this organization, I believe, was created by the city governments to provide consultation that would benefit the cities so they remain compliant with these growth management laws. But they also get to direct how those projects are going to look in their individual cities. So basically they're coming together, though they have lesser representation than a county, they still, as a whole, have a little bit more clout than they would as individual cities. And that's a benefit to our city in particular, because we are limited in our budget, but we have the advantage of being part of an organization that is bigger than what we could normally afford. And so I know what your caution is, but I think for the citizens of Kenmore, it's a good investment for our city to have connected consultants who are watching what's happening countywide so that we can be compliant and do a planning strategy like this so that we don't run into trouble in the future, both, leaving our city open without the housing that we actually need, but also meeting these different criteria that we're looking at, that we're going to, take up to the council in our recommendations. So having a bigger picture, I think, does help. I understand your point.
I'm not fighting the existence
No.
of Arch. I'm
No.
just saying we need to disclose, and I got to tell you, I'm a reasonably intelligent guy. I'm not the smartest guy in the world, but I'm pretty confused by this. I'm confused by an entity that's not an entity. I'm confused by a trust without a trustee. I'm a little confused by where the money goes and who approves how it's dispersed. I guess it's city councils, but there's this executive board, and they're making recommendations. And my hope is that we can, in a simplified way, describe this so that the world knows these are public documents, it's a public process, who's advising us and what their potential interest in the advice they give us might be. So here we've got a footnote. It doesn't mention the Housing Trust Fund. We may not get to the point where I understand it very well, but as long as we disclose it in a way I think that's understandable to others, and it's not in a footnote, I think I'd be okay with that.
I'm trying to kind of wrap my arm around the best way to describe this. I think at the last meeting, the concern basically was you wanted to take from a broader perspective. You recognize that in the documents and say that, of course, as these strategies move forward, there will be input from a broader perspective. And to me, that was the main concern about art and the information being provided. If we wanted to have a broader perspective, we would say we recognize that, we will highlight that in this document and say that moving forward that we'll be broader input. I think what you're trying to say is you don't like, that you have some concerns about art in general and what they're trying to basically give you throughout the process. I haven't really heard that from the rest of the commission. So again, if the commission's concern is moving forward that there could be broader input, I think we recognize that. If the commission's concern is Archie's role in providing advice to the city because there's a fear that they're gaining somehow because there is a trust fund.
Well, it didn't come up, the trust fund didn't come up at the last meeting, so nobody could have rendered an opinion on it. My recollection was that there were more than a few commissioners who were concerned that Arch was the sole advisor of the commission on this issue, and that's why, and I think that was voted on, those concerns should be expressed here. It's a very limited well of information that we've received to this point.
And I think we did recognize that, saying that this moves forward.
Right.
So I think that was the concern that was expressed, and that's what we addressed in this report.
Right. So I'm saying I think it's buried in a footnote. I think it shouldn't be. I think others agree with that. And I think there should be mention of the Housing Trust Fund. And my hope is we can describe that trust fund in a way that others, the council, and the general public can understand.
Well, council will be looking at the direct business strategy, so part of that discussion will come from the council.
Yeah.
So, again, I'm not sure kind of how those issues go into a lot of detail about the trust.
Well, and I'm not looking to go,
The commission in that direction.
as I said, hopefully there's a simplified way we can describe this trust fund, because it, I think, looks to an objective person at arm's length as a potential pecuniary interest of Arch in what advice and decisions they give and the decisions that are made. You've got a trust fund, cities are contributing, and you're the sole source of information on the housing issue. It just doesn't smell good. So we've seen other cities have blow-ups on their city council about concealed interests and conflicts of interests, and I don't want to be part of that.
So if I could, I've almost lost my train of thought to your point. I think the way I would typically characterize the limitation that you've all expressed a concern about is to say that it's been more of a staff-driven limitation and that we've served as staff. Now, we did research because we have talked over the years with many stakeholders. We had a special meeting last spring because we knew other stakeholders. We provided you that report. But, and I don't have any problem with you calling it outreach or whatever, but we were created to essentially be housing staffs for cities, to assist them when, as requested, as called out in our work program. Our work program for last year includes managing the trust fund, which and also include for Kenmore, providing staff assistance on developing this document. I totally agreed in the last meeting that it needs to be called out that you had a more internal, with staff doing what staff do, which is bringing in some outside information from work that they found, but it didn't directly bring to you that it's third party. I totally concur with that. But to somehow connotate us as somehow a third party that is trying to do something for some objectives that we have on the side, I think that's I would characterize that as a representation I've never heard in 25 years of managing this program at this stage of a process with a city. So I would be worried about mischaracterizing what the history has also been as well. Definitely no question about characterizing your discussions as internally driven, and we were created to provide a little more in-house expertise to cities. That's what our purpose is.
Which is fine.
Right.
I just want it all on paper in a pretty conspicuous way, certainly more than the footnote that doesn't mention the Housing Trust Fund. And hopefully, you know, I wish I understood it better. I would draft something and run it past people so that we could all like have something to look at. Because right now we're talking somewhat in abstractions. But what I think there's agreement on, at least a majority, is we need to be more conspicuous and clear up front in this memo about what Arch does, what their role is, and where the money's going.
From my perspective, it may be not so much an expanded section of the report as much as an attachment or appendix that talks more about Arch, because that gives a disclosure that I think we're seeking. And if somebody wants to check it out, it's there. It's one way. It can look like a bit of a distraction if you make it too much in the text. I don't know.
Well, I agree. I mean, at the very least, there should be something that, and I would err on the side of thorough. I'm not looking for something, you know, ideally it'd be a paragraph. I mean, we've got a paragraph in this footnote, but I read it and I thought, this is so vague. Again, I'm left wondering exactly what's being done here. So maybe it is. We got to have a lengthy attachment or something. I don't know. But I sure want to be able to point to it and be able to say, this is who we got our advice from. And we're not, as a commission, trying to withhold any of that information. We want you to know who informed us.
But I think
there's more to this than what may appear to, you know, an objective, arm's-length third party. Go ahead.
To me, it's kind of semantics. I understand because you're more detail, drilling down to the core bottom of things. I appreciate that. But I also think that it's good that you can state, I don't understand what Arch does. Because really what they are is they are staff support, providing, I mean, Debbie and her department isn't necessarily going to go out and research all of this stuff in King County. They're relying on Arch to do those comparison studies. What I think the commission has done that's been a good job is we've actually, when we've come up to information that didn't seem complete or it didn't seem current, we were then able to go back to city staff and to Arch and say, we want more current information or expanded information in this particular area, which helped us to create that document that we're going to, the matrix of recommendations. And I really believe that because that's in this document, I don't know that council needs to know all of the discussions that we had, how we chose these highlighted areas, and the way we prioritize them. I think it's a work in progress that I feel good about our work. I mean, I feel like stating that you can't pass up your work to the council because it's not accurate or doesn't have as much fine detail as it really could. Are you just saying that it's in this area of disclosing Arch's role?
Yeah, I'm not trying to get into all the details about what we did from July.
Okay.
I just want to make it clear, and I want it up front. We got our advice from Arch. They're the only advisor that was brought to us.
And can we,
What Arch does.
would you also like to include that it's our recommendation, we could vote on this, create some kind of a statement, it's our recommendation when the council looks at this information, that they too may come to places in the matrix where they might require more information?
Well, that's too vague. I mean, we've got language in here that I think is pretty good. I mean, I think it should be a little more conspicuous, but there are places where this memo.
You mean the introduction memo?
No, I'm looking at page 2. As I said, if it were up to me, I would strike the introduction. I would start with in April. We would put right in front of them as a first thing, here's what we were asked to do. And then we would get to A, who advised us, and then then one of the other things I wanted to get to quickly was Kenmore. What is Kenmore? What's their character? That's on page 2. So I like that bullet point. And then we had a bullet point about current local housing conditions, but I didn't think that was very helpful because it just talked about low-income people. And Kenmore is more than just low-income people. What I'd rather get to is why do we have this problem? Regional housing market economics, which I think is a very good bullet point. And then where does Kenmore fit into that? And I had presented the numbers that showed Kenmore was far more affordable than all the other Arch cities. And instead, what we got was a sentence that said it was somewhat less expensive, which I thought was so vague it didn't make the point. And I don't know why, but left out the numbers.
We were challenged there because we had two different numbers, and depending on how you look at the numbers, you get different answers. One was the average pricing, but the other was how many units were affordable at 30% and 50%, and that's where you were very similar to the county. So we were a little bit torn without going in, that's why we have the backup documents, and it's there, is we tried to make a statement because there's different data that sort of has a little bit different.
You talk the difference between median and average?
No, when
Okay.
we have another data point that we have, which is the one that's most linked to the countywide planning policy language, states what percentage of your units are affordable at each, at 30% of median and at 50 and at 80. And I'm getting this right, Mike? Mm-hmm. And those percentages are very comparable to King County, whereas your overall average is lower, but the profile of the low income is very similar to King County.
Yeah, because we have a lot of low-income people. So the problem isn't housing affordability by price, it's income by a segment of the Kenmore population. So I think we have is that right? I think
We're
we have an
saying the
anomaly
percentage
here.
of housing units that are affordable at 30% and 50,
Right.
not the incomes.
So it's confusing because Kenmore, the last I checked, I looked online today, I could pull it up here, but the median income in Kenmore is $88,000 plus. And that's much higher than the King County average. It's lower than I think a lot of the other Arch cities, maybe all of them. But we have a lot more affordable housing, as we've seen. The median price in Kenmore is much lower than the rest of the arch cities. But the people who are really low income, and I guess there's a pretty sizable number of those in Kenmore, so there's a lot of cost burden or housing burdened families in Kenmore. So I think that's why it's sort of an anomaly. You look at different numbers and you get a different sense of what's going on. What I'm trying to do, and what's I think was taken out of, was one of the concerns I pointed out in my memo to the commissioners last time, and was removed, was here's how we compare to the other arch cities. When I said we are 37% median below, at least based on the 2013 numbers, the median housing price for all the other arch cities. We were 13 to 15% below even the next lowest arch city. So my point was, we're not a typical arch city, and we're also not, we're doing a lot of comparing Kenmore to King County, but we're not in a typical part of King County. We're on Lake Washington. There's only a handful of cities on Lake Washington. It's a very desirable area. So it bothers me that there's so much focus on countywide numbers when we really should be looking at arch-wide numbers, because that's a much more representative sampling of what Kenmore is. How are we compared to similar cities? Not how are we compared to Auburn or Kent or some cities with rural, very rural housing stock.
Well, I think we provided a lot of provided a lot of information about housing affordability and comparisons across cities, comparisons across cities within Arch. And I think, as Arthur's pointed out, depending on which data you look at, it's how you characterize the issue. So I would be careful of just having one point in there. We can maybe expand on that a little more to characterize affordability, but I don't think it's just down to...
And I think our intention is to the summary data that we provided to you to also include when we go to council. So, I think we did say that relative to other East King County cities, you are more affordable. I think we do say that.
Yeah, but you took out the numbers. That's what I'm saying. Here's the paragraph. Local conditions, and it's all about low-income people. It's not about the city at large or the housing stock at large and affordability at large. We have, as I said, median income $88,000. 74% Kenmore residences are owner-occupied, or 74% of the housing is owner-occupied.
Single family.
Yeah, detached single-family residences.
So
that's the vast majority of our housing, of our community, and then you've got this local conditions, and it's low income.
That was
what
because
can low income afford?
We also received a request from the commission to explain why affordability is an issue, and so you're right. This points here, as you mentioned at the very beginning, council said it with emphasis on affordability, and we were asked to punch up the story on affordability, and so we tried to do that.
There's two sides to that.
I'm explaining this, and this is the same as last time.
I think this could work. I just feel like I made 16 points here, and pretty much there was agreement. Yeah, let's get that into the memo. Instead of attaching this to whatever you guys write up, or instead of holding a series of additional meetings where we get the building community in here, we get the landlord community in here, we get other private sector perspectives on this issue, maybe we can make this work. Maybe it's a simplified thing, and we'll just tell the council, this is just a starting point for you. But instead, what I've got is a big focus on how many people can't afford housing in Kenmore when the vast majority have their own house. And the numbers are gone, and instead we get overall Kenmore's housing is somewhat more affordable than King County overall, and also more affordable than most instead of all other cities located in East King County.
So we did try to take your memo and put as much in here as we could, and if adding that number in would help you. The reason why we didn't just drop it in is because when we looked at other numbers, so we wanted to make the point. But if you want that number in, then we're happy to do that. But I think of your 16 points, we worked very hard to incorporate them in.
I want to say, I saw that. There are parts in here where I said, good, I see it, I appreciate it. I might move a couple around. And that's why I think we can make this work. But I'm discouraged that I gave you some really specific stuff, and you took out the specific, and instead put in, and these words aren't even right. They're not even a correct paraphrase to say most other cities in Arch. No, it's all other cities in Arch, and it's not even close. So I feel like it was just distorted in here. But I think we can make this work, and I think we could do both. I think we could say both that Kenmore is more affordable than every other Arch city, a lot, but there are affordable housing problems in Kenmore, particularly among those who don't have much money, and we can go to the 30% or the 50% of median King County income and say, here's their cost burden. So we're trying to come up with a policy that addresses affordable housing, but it's more than just really poor people. It's middle-income people, too. It's a lot of people are straining under the weight of the appreciation in housing. And so I'd like to I think that's what our goal was here. And I just thought, reading especially this local conditions box, which is highlighted, it was all about one segment of the issue. So, and I'll just say, I don't want to, it's 8:47. I don't want to go over every word and paragraph. This is 9 pages. I think it could be about 5. I will say it's really the first 4.5 pages where I thought we could both cut a lot of stuff out and get to the point and give both sides of the context. And then the rest is talking about, here's the matrix, here's the tiers.
Yeah, the matrix, to me, is the bulk of it.
Which I'm not going to wrestle with. I'm okay with that.
I mean,
and we had our
we already
decision.
wrestled with what's on the matrix.
Pardon?
I really think that the matrix is going to be the information that the council uses mostly to look at what the priorities are and then come up with what they want to work on first. So what I'm hearing from you is, as you read through this introduction and the descriptive pages leading up to the matrix, you feel that there's not enough specifics and too much generalization.
Close. I mean, I think the broader picture was lost because there was so much focus on one segment of the issue. I do think that the introduction, and we could talk about the comp plan, we could talk about the Growth Management Act, we could talk about the counties, CPPs, that kind of thing. We didn't really get into that. It's not like we said, hey, let's stop, let's go look at the Growth Management Act before we make that decision, or let's look at the comp plan before we make this other decision. I know that there's a housing element in the comp plan. I printed it out. I know there's an affordable housing sub-element to that.
But early on, we did have conversations about all of this stuff to provide context so that we understood what we were doing. And now we're passing this project back. I don't think it's detracting from this document to have those kind of bullet points. We did have those conversations early
they were
on.
mentioned, but in the process of deciding, I don't think we put much weight on what the GMA or the CPPs or the comp plan said. They're pretty general anyway. But look, I'm not looking for a fight. I'm just trying to move this forward. And if we want to vote on, we prefer to keep it as is, that's fine. I respect that.
Okay.
If we want to streamline it a little bit, that's my preference, but I'll go with the majority.
So what I'm hearing is, again, like I said, we were trying to respond to the punch up the affordable housing need issue in the local conditions. If adding a bullet or two on overall housing conditions with some numbers behind that similar to what you had, would that be a way to address your comment?
Maybe. I just don't know. We did this, I thought last time we gave pretty clear instructions and we got this, and it's like, no, they threw this out, they watered this down, they focused on that. It's not what I had in mind. But, and we're, as I said, talking about maybe 4.5 pages. I'd be willing to revise and give a draft and say, okay, most of this I would keep or reorder. Some I would say, it doesn't hurt. I'm not saying it's wrong. I just think it clouds it. It's already too long. I don't think they want to read again about the GMA or the CP or whatever. If others disagree, that's fine. But I would have it would be shorter. It would be in the order that I thought talked about last time, which is here's our instructions. It's an economic issue. Here's our economic analysis. Here's about the region. Here's about Kenmore. Here's some of the things we considered. And a lot of that's in there. And here's the tier process we went through. And by the way, we emphasized this and this. Transportation, public transportation was a big deal. Market efficiencies was a big deal. Tenant protections was discouraged. We thought that would be counterproductive. I'd like to put that all up front. I think those are the highlights of what we decided, and then we can get into here's the detail about the tiers, the matrix, the monitoring.
Because I think it gets down to really the recommendations that you've got in the matrix. Happy with those, the question then is just about the background information and how you got to that. That's the rest of the document. Each of this is actually the matrix and what is that. The rest of it, we can kind of figure out a way to streamline it and get you there. For me, if you're happy with the matrix and the recommendation, the rest of it is just telling the story.
I'm fine with that. I'm fine with that. Let me open the floor. There were a couple minor points about, I think, the matrix thing, but mostly, as I said, I'm okay with that. I think actually the context is a bigger thing, but that's me. But go ahead, Mark.
Yeah, I agree that the meat of what we're recommending is the strategies and the tiers, but the context sets it up. It sets up how the council's going to look at it. It sets up how citizens are going to look at it. So I think it's important that we get it right. And I do agree with Doug. I think we can shorten it and summarize it better and maybe highlight. You know, I like actually most of the bullets that are here. We could probably do a little less on the the process angles from the state and county planning policies. We could probably. So I think there is room to condense it without losing the essential points. I did want to say that I agree with Doug, we do need a little more balance in the local conditions somewhere. I recognize Arthur was trying to emphasize affordability, and that was the right direction, but I do think we need a little more balance about single-family home ownership is a really important part, and median income probably is too, so.
Anybody else? Thank you, Mark. So I guess we could talk about any other points. As I said, I had a couple more that are relatively much simpler than what I've already brought up. And then talk about, okay, how do we get to where we want to be efficiently? I don't want to split hairs and get into wordsmithing with the limited time we have. As I said, I'm willing to write something up, throw it out there. I'm happy if people want to tinker with that. It might be more efficient than us tonight, going, oh, well, this paragraph, this sentence, that sentence.
Well, we have an hour. Let's see how we can get done.
I could throw out what I have in mind, but go ahead,
we could
Mark.
just at least figure out what you want to emphasize, what points to emphasize in a condensed.
Yeah, I'll tell you the sequence I have in mind. Yeah. Well, I think the first thing was, let's explain Arch a little more in the Housing Trust Fund. To me, that was a pretty big deal. I think there are people out there who would think that we should talk about the trust fund as part of what Arch does.
Link to your website.
Yeah, I mean, I printed that thing out. Right, right.
What I'm sensing is that the footnote is almost there, maybe a little
Yeah. Well,
more, whether we can refer to documents, kind of people want to know more about art, what they do, the way to get there without going into enormous amount of detail.
I'm okay with that. I'd like it to be not in a footnote if we can keep it simple enough so it doesn't look buried. And then there were some references, as long as we're on that subject, to there was a paragraph that I really had a problem with. It was on page 2. It's at the bottom. It says, perspectives from housing industry stakeholders. The commission relied primarily on their own knowledge and experience to bring the perspectives of special interests and the public at large to bear on their discussions. I don't know what you're even, what special interests were we promoting or discussing in this? I mean, that's, A, it's vague, and B, I don't even know how it fits into what we did. Then there was, in addition, staff presented the findings from surveys and focus groups of the private sector conducted earlier in the year. And I think that was a handout that you gave us. Did Arch put that together? Right. 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 So here's my problem. It's yet another product from Arch. But to read this, you wouldn't know that. So it looks like, oh, we got all this input from other sources, but it was paraphrased input that Arch collected and that Arch presented. So that's misleading to me. And then there was the one part, then there was a sentence, these included perspectives on specific strategies that were part of the initial draft strategy matrix. I'm not sure what that means. And then we finally had, there was limited direct input from stakeholders. Yes, it's important that as individual strategies are further evaluated and developed, there be robust public involvement and stakeholder outreach to obtain a variety of perspectives. If it were up to me, that would be the only sentence that we put in there, that we point out, look, we got this from Arch, that was it, and we need to, if we're going to go further with any of this, we would really need the presence and advice, comments from other industry stakeholders.
So just to clarify, you are not comfortable with the statement saying the commission relied primarily upon their own knowledge and experience to bring their perspectives of special interests and the public at large to bear on their discussions.
Right.
So how would you describe what we did?
We have all our own experience. That's true in every issue we take up. But this makes it sound like we were representing some special interest, some outside interest, that may have some other conflicting interests with what the city's best interests are.
Okay.
I mean, that word special interest, that's a heavily loaded political pejorative.
So if we put
a cudgel for, some sector of the industry?
If we put a period after the word experience and deleted the rest of the sentence, would that?
Why have it? We all bring our perspectives to every issue.
That's kind of why we're a commission, is because we represent the community.
Well, I get that.
Right.
But I'm just saying, we're making our decisions based on the input we get. And we pushed back on a number of times. I know I did.
But we also brought...
I'm not representing a special interest.
We actually did bring information in from things that we read, things that we noted in the news.
So I'm okay with that in there.
But I understand why you're reacting to that, or objecting to it is really a better word, because that's basically what the commission's job is to bring our experience and our observations into the discussion. So does it seem kind of a redundant statement to you?
I think it's superfluous.
Okay.
And look at the heading of this paragraph, perspectives from housing industry stakeholders.
Right.
That's not us.
Right.
So all we got was Arch. That's the point I've been trying to make. This is Arch. We got this. We challenged it. We analyzed it. Here's what we looked at. I mean, that's part of what was up here earlier. There's the economic side. And if we want to go further, we should hear from others.
So I think if we took out that first sentence and we can say that we presented that our staff, we can say our staff, including Arch, presented findings, and then, or we can, if we want, we can put that last sentence first, if that's what we want to emphasize. I think this paragraph is trying to state facts of what you did, what information you looked at, and that there is a need to have more outreach as this moves forward. So
I'm fine with that. It's just this paragraph says more than that, and I think it's misleading. And what you just said was a sentence And that's, I think, all we need is
It is.
maybe 2 sentences here.
I think really the point is, it is the commission's recommendation that along with the ARCH and staff-driven surveys, the commission recommends that others, you can make it really simple. It can just be a sentence.
Yeah.
But I understand where you're coming from, because it isn't a complete picture, because it's not inviting others that might have a contribution to the process in. But that's the point we're at. We're at the beginning.
We all agree on that. And
We
I
all
think
agree
that was
on that.
kind of what we came up with last week,
Right.
last meeting, was
Right.
we got to make this clear. This isn't clear. This makes it look like we had a stake in this and we had our own interest to challenge whatever ARCH. We didn't. We were just relying on what they said. I have experience. Other people have experience. We
But
brought
maybe
that
it
in.
can be stated that relying on ARCH's surveys and staff input.
I think it's there. I think it's a concern if we take out that first sentence, I think we have it.
You mean if you just removed perspectives from housing industry?
Well, who presented the surveys? It would sound like it came from ARCH.
We can add by ARCH.
What?
Yeah, we'll write in reference by ARCH. I mean, we can do that at the
Right.
end of that sentence.
We can add that in there, so remove the first sentence, we can add a reference to ARCH. I think it's clearly in there that there's a need for more outreach. I think that would make the point that we're trying to get to.
Can I ask a question? What would we do differently, Debbie, in terms of public involvement and stakeholder outreach than we've done in previous docket agenda items? So, for example, with wireless communications, I don't feel like we had to work that hard for interested parties to attend our meetings and provide their input, right? They had a commercial interest, to be sure, but I think so do builder associations and other affordable housing organizations or advocacy groups. Our meetings are publicly announced, right? Our agendas are published. With issues such as Windthrow and wireless communications, stakeholders certainly attended and provided perspective. I don't think we've done anything particularly different here. Maybe we didn't. I think we only had one other person or organization provide us an input memo, right, very early in the process. So in terms of outreach, I think we've followed our standard operating procedure about public meetings. No other interest groups have chosen to come and provide perspective, which I've taken as an indication that it's not a contested issue. If this were a contested issue, I think builders associations would make it a point to attend meetings like these and say, this is our perspective on affordable housing, or this is our perspective on the different strategies that you guys are considering, but that's actually never occurred in the 6 or 7 months that we've been talking about this. So I'm just thinking about, it almost feels like we're scolding ourselves in this bullet point for not bringing in additional stakeholders, but this is my 4th or 5th different agenda item I've worked on the commission. And on every other one, people have managed to find their way here to share their input with us. On this issue, which has actually taken up as much of our time as anything we've done since I've been on the commission, no one has approached. So I'm not too concerned about these external stakeholders. If the council, when they get our recommendation, wants to go forward and do more aggressive outreach to bring those people in, I'd say great, the more input the better. But interestingly, since July, we haven't had anybody.
We had I'm sorry, go ahead.
I agree with what Mike said. I think the difference here is that we haven't, unlike the other agenda items, we're not making any recommendations other than we think these are worth looking at more closely. We haven't made any specific recommendations yet. I think we will get, certainly if it does come back to us and we have some recommendations on, say ADUs, I'm quite confident we'll get plenty of input. I just think it's the stage of the process that we're at. Again, I said it before, we're really trying to develop a menu of things that the council can order or not order and look further into that menu as they see fit. So I think it's the stage of the process we're at that is the reason we haven't gotten any input to speak of.
So, and first of all, we did get an appearance from the Washington Rental Housing Association. I don't know if you're here for that one. His position, his industry's position was very different from Arch's on tenant protection laws, which is the point he stepped in to comment on. Having worked in this industry, housing, real estate, I can tell you there are numerous strongly held different opinions. I suspect this issue is in the papers virtually every week. There was a big article last Thursday I printed out that there's dozens of them, but I mean one in particular about how now rents are falling because of increased supply and construction of residential units in the area, which corroborates the economic analysis that we've endorsed in this process. So I don't think it's because they're not paying attention. I think they're saturated. I think they're buried in this issue, and they're running from, and mostly in Seattle, but other legislatures trying to represent their interests. Whether they show voluntarily or not, I think for us to make a balanced policy, we have to hear from more than one voice on this issue, just as the city of Seattle convened over 25 stakeholders or industry representatives on the same issue to try and come up with a balanced approach.
So one reason we did do our stakeholders meeting is for exactly the dynamic you guys have been talking about. It's hard for all of them to go to all these cities and all their meetings, especially at this stage. Yes, when you get to a specific ordinance, they will be there. And so we went to our members and said, it's going to be hard for you to get them to come. If we bring everyone together and give you the notes with them in the room, at least you will have some of that. And that's one of the reasons we did that in the spring, was so that if they did have a hard time covering 10 cities, that at least you would get some of, we didn't filter their comments. We brought them together because we do think it's important for you to hear those perspectives. And so that's one reason we did the stakeholders meetings last spring, is to give you more than you might have gotten otherwise.
Which is helpful, but they're not part of the dialogue. So,
No, I understood.
And, as we've all experienced through this since July, I've looked at this, I've looked at articles, and I've said, hey, what about this and what about that? There's something they're not participating in that. So it's helpful to have survey responses in April, but it's not the same as them being at the table. And I know enough about this industry to know there's a lot that's not being discussed here. And I shouldn't be the one trying to do it all because I'm on the commission. It should come from third-party sources who know even more and better than I do. And I'm trying to get it all into it myself from all sides. So I really don't like wearing that hat, but I felt like there was this void. So I wore more of the hat, and it's still there. And I don't feel like I can do it justice anyway. So that's to respond. I mean, I see where you're coming from.
Yeah.
That's the point. So I think, Mark, your point was kind of in agreement, but this is something we got to make it clear this is very
We have to
limited.
remember where we are in the process. I think that's key in presenting this to the council, and I think this introductory narrative does that reasonably well. Again, I think we could condense it in I mean, are we at the point where what are we trying to do now? Are we trying to tell Debbie and the Arch folks how they should structure? I'm not clear
That's
what
what
we're
you
trying to
want.
do right now.
I would rather write something and send it out and work from there instead of us going on with, well, I think paragraph X on 3 should be on page 1. And the one on 2 should be above the one above it, something like that. There's a number of those. I feel like that might be more efficient.
If there's a reason on the commission that it's a question of reorganizing and I said 2 and 3 things that you'd like to feel like statements up front about what the direction was, kind of sort of the opening paragraph, if you like. Like more information in the local commission to give a more complete picture of the housing market,
Well, like I said, I could write it, but I'll tell you what I have here. I would strike the introduction. I would strike the first sentence in the background. After the first sentence, I would mention Arch. This is the source of the information we received. So I would take the footnote on page 2 and enhance it with reference to the Housing Trust Fund and put it after that and explain this is where we got information, the sole source of advice to the Commission on this issue. I would put below that the last paragraph on page 2, which says perspectives from industry stakeholders. I would strike everything except the last sentence. And I would enhance that to make clear that I would tweak it. I think I would say because there was limited direct input from stakeholders, the Commission feels it's important that as individual strategies are further evaluated and developed, there be robust public involvement and stakeholder outreach. I would phrase it differently. That's passive voice, and I would say that staff assemble other stakeholders and experts in this industry to present a variety of perspectives. So that's the next thing I would put. And then I would go to the economics. It's an economic question. I would expressly say that. So we engaged in an economic analysis. I would talk about the regional housing market economics as the next paragraph, which I think is just about ideal as it is written. And then I would mention that Kenmore, in relation to other arch cities, is much more affordable, and I would mention the numbers. And then I would mention the paragraph, which is bullet point 3 on page 2, that Kenmore's character is as a largely residential community with a majority of residential land area used for single-family housing. I think it'd be helpful to plug in that percentage. It's, I think, striking, and it distinguishes and says a lot about Kenmore, 74% single-family owner-occupied housing. And I think it would be helpful to say, you know, to give, yeah, we're affordable compared to the other arch cities. We have a lot of owner-occupied single-family residences. We have a pretty high median income, but we also have, you know, the low-income side of it. And that's where I want to take a few snippets out of, I don't want to go to the extent that this memo does, but some of the items, maybe 2, maybe 3, from the box from pages 3 and 4 about local conditions. And give the couple of most meaningful telling points about how lower income people are housing burdened. Then I would mention the item about public transportation. And I would also mention our opposition, which appeared much later in the memo, I think it's page 7, to tenant protections. And I'll tell you why, and I've thought more about this since the last meeting. Well, I want to move that up there. I'm seeing there's so much attention given to those lately. The City of Seattle is just obsessed with this. Renton has taken up this issue. Section 8, mandatory anti-discrimination laws requiring landlords to take these Section 8 housing vouchers. I think there's a lot of bad housing policy out there. I think it's not just in this area, but I think we've seen it play out in California and other places. And I think there are a lot of legislatures who are willing and anxious to latch on to what seems like a Band-Aid simple fix, which I think those are, when in fact they are counterproductive to the cost of housing. And so that's why I want to take that from page 7 and put that up near the front after we give the other context. Because I got a strong feeling that there's going to be at least one council member who's going to think that's the way to go, because they've been reading the headlines to their credit, and that's what's being talked about. And we gave that a lot of thought, and we have an opinion on it, so they can reject it, accept it, whatever. But I think that's going to be pretty high on their list of issues when they look at what we give them. So that's kind of my sense of, and I think it could be done in fewer pages. And then we get into, I know what you guys think is the essence of it, which I'm pretty happy with. As I said, I think there might be a couple of really minor comments on that. that I could bring up. One that I do want to mention is homelessness, which I think was in the council directive to us. They mentioned affordable housing. I think there was a reference to homelessness. And we spent virtually no time on homelessness. And I happen to think that homeless is a very different, qualitatively different kind of issue than affordable housing. It's not about markets. It's not about supply and demand. It has a lot more to do, I think, with mental illness and drug addiction, which overlap to some extent, and other social issues, big, huge social issues. But I think we got to say something, because I think it's likely that if the council said, and talk about homelessness, we need to say something. So whether we say that way or something else, I think we ought to put something in there about it. Yeah, and I was surprised too. It's something I caught, I think, at a later reading of, I think, the discussions with the council. And I think I might have missed that meeting, but I remember reading something. I thought I saw that in there. So let's check. If it's not in there, then let's not make work.
It wasn't one of the target population.
It wasn't.
I don't think it was included under these housing strategies, that it was acknowledged that it's a social issue, but it's not included in this housing strategy.
Yeah.
Other than Kenmore is open, and we're very fortunate to have public assistance type organizations, but they're nonprofit. So we do have 3 different, kind of crisis housing available in Kenmore, but that didn't come up as part of the affordable housing strategy because.
Go ahead. I'm sorry. Go ahead. I didn't mean to interrupt. Okay. Go ahead, Arthur.
So this has been part of the dilemma of your whole conversation. If you look under direct assistance, you will see mentions of homelessness, because generally, because of the income level involved, the local efforts have involved direct assistance. And if you look at them, you will see there will be some that they will look at which will explicitly address homelessness. So given what your purview has been, it's not as likely for it to have come up much in this conversation yet.
Okay.
But that was on purpose from the council, because they kind of blocked that into that whole public assistance type language.
Okay.
And we may get an opportunity to work on that at a later date.
Right. So thanks for that. I just didn't want to be flat-footed, because it's a pretty big deal and a lot of.
It's pervasive.
Yeah. Well, I'm just saying it gets a lot of attention. It's not just that the issue's pervasive, but the media focus is pervasive.
Sorry. That you did put as a tier 1 under regional and statewide initiatives to work with other cities, because that's the other way. Homelessness is down on a more cooperative basis.
Okay.
And you did make that a tier 1. So I think to the extent you could deal with homelessness, you made it a tier 1 issue.
All right.
As a regional.
All right.
Right, from the regional perspective.
Okay. Are we good? Do you want me to sum that up in an email? I know I threw a lot at you there. I'm happy to try and make it easy.
If you wouldn't mind,
I'd be happy to.
I'll tell you what I got, and we can go for an email call. I got that at least start off with saying what the council directive was, so it's clear that's up front. And then in terms of context and background, you want some information about the arts role, about limitations about stakeholders, focus on an economic, so this is an economic analysis. About the outlining the local conditions in terms of general data and affordable data, sort of making those more concise. Having a point in there about why the tenant direct strategies were not included.
Tenant protection proposals, right.
Proposals were not included, and that's where I sort of have it right now. So
Okay.
if I'm looking at this, it looks like it's pages 1 through a little bit of 4.
Yep.
And other than that, that's where I've heard this discussion is sort of reorganizing, and I haven't really heard a lot about the rest of the document needing particular work.
Okay, how about this? we strike from page 2 the reference to the GMA. Yeah, we could have it in there. Carol's right. It was, it is part of the context. I just don't think it's going to give them any guidance. The CPPs, I would strike. Current local housing conditions, I would strike.
I have an objection to that.
Go ahead.
My objection is some of this background of those bullet points is exactly why this is a topic we're working on. If we didn't have those overarching laws in King County, we probably, as cities, wouldn't address them. And, our comprehensive plan, we did our update. Now we're going back through and we're looking at, okay, according to what our vision is for the next 20 years, how do we remain compliant in those top 3 items that you want to strike out of the context of introducing why we have this matrix? I do not agree with you.
Okay. Anybody else?
You always want to weigh in on that.
Yeah, that's the only way to break it down.
I think it's easiest to leave them in.
Yeah.
Because you keep saying, well, the council doesn't want to read this. But you know what? They can read it.
I don't know if they do.
I don't think that's your job to decide. Our job is just to hand them a document, and it's up to them to read it. I mean, it's 1 page, background bullets.
It's less.
Right.
And I don't mean to, I'm not looking for a wrestling match.
Okay. Well, you're going to get one.
I got it. I know. I'm telling you. I'm trying to get the olive branch out here. So I'm not going to wrestle. I mean, if you really want it, that's fine. There are things I've really wanted. You've been very generous about it, so I can understand that.
I agree with Carol. It's part of the context, and I think that's important.
That's fine.
To state.
All right.
It can be maybe summarized a little in fewer words, but
Right.
I just believe it should be there.
This one about current local housing conditions, I think I didn't get much from it. And we're already going to be talking about Kenmore, how relative to other cities it's affordable. I did suggest we put in the income, the median income. I did suggest we put in some low-income numbers in there. I think we can do without that one in the middle. I think we already mentioned it, though, to some extent already. And when you get to regional housing market economics, it says a lot of the same things. Price increases are a function of increased demand exceeding supply, job growth, job centers. I think that's the essence of it anyway.
But I think they went from current local housing conditions and describing that in Kenmore, and then they went to a regional view.
Right. I'd rather flip it, start regional, get local, and the problem with the current local housing conditions is it points to the box, which I've already said, let's get rid of the box, take a few of the key items out, and then put it in the local conditions with the other numbers. I think it would be a lot more efficient. This, to me, is confusing because you're kind of going back and forth.
Is it because you don't like that the highlight is about affordable housing? It's the only one segment of.
It's only one segment of affordable housing.
Okay.
Right.
And really, when you look at the matrix, we do cover multiple tiers.
We do, and it's, our proposals had a broader impact.
Yeah, it's more inclusive, which is what the city should be, right?
Right. Anything else?
In the whole document?
Yeah, I mean, anybody.
I think it was a draw between the two of you.
No, I gave in. She won.
I know, but you got the first part.
So,
Well, that's right.
so do we want to flip the regional and local, add those statistical supports for both of them, or how?
We don't have a lot of regional statistics.
True.
So I just want to talk about the regional in the context of economic principles. Any article you read, like the one I just mentioned from last,
Right.
it's real. I like the article because it really talked about the economics, the regional economics
That's
of it.
what's driving
And
it.
I was kind of pleased that it corroborated everything we've discussed. So I think that's all we have to say.
Just one bullet point. I mean, one sentence.
It was a paragraph. Regional housing market economics, page 2, second to last bullet point.
Okay, so you're okay with that being in?
Yeah, I
You just
really
wanna-
want it to be, in fact.
Okay, so you want, but what I'm hearing you say is that rather than being located in the bullet points after local, you'd like the regional to come first, just in your thinking.
Yes.
Okay,
And I
that's
think
great.
it's easier to understand Kenmore in that context, because they're really a function of that regional dynamic. All right. Floor's open. Dennis?
This is more of a style approach, but to the degree we've been, I don't want to say wordsmithing, but a certain amount of that is, should we go back to a style where you number each line? Because if we don't do that, it takes a while for everybody to figure out where we're talking. So
I like it.
do you mind if we go to that, where when you print it out, you print it in Word or whatever with numbers on the left-hand side so we can refer to it?
You don't have that? Page numbering, legal document, function?
Yeah. Yeah. Well,
Did we have it once before? Did we have it in some other documents?
No, not.
I'm not sure that we have as a commission. I don't remember seeing it, but I know that it's very handy when you start.
We're moving things around.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's just in that
We had
little
it.
box and you hit the.
I know we had it.
Yeah.
in, like,
I'm sure there's somebody there.
appendices, right?
It was something.
I am sure that your legal department or attorney can probably put you in contact with their secretary that can quickly point out where it is.
Like the ordinance proposals or something?
They were just
Arthur, you sound like you,
numbers.
Okay.
Is this just for the first part? Because when you start getting into outline and text and.
no,
No.
right, just the textual part.
So are you just saying that page 1 through 4?
Yes, I think that's what I'm saying. It just makes references earlier if we're looking at hammering.
And so
words.
will our goal be that with the contributions we've given you tonight, we would come back on the 17th and finish that document?
Well stated.
Well, I'm hearing a couple of things, but what I'm hearing is that it does give us a very strong perspective about how we want to organize and where you want what. And I'm concerned then is, that we have made a couple of attempts here to include those. So if you want to give some
I will.
information, that would be helpful. I also want to make sure that, the information is presented in a way that does have the background information in there. So all I'm really doing right now is really reorganizing the background of the context.
I don't believe that we are wanting to change from where it's describing the matrix and how the matrix is organized. None of that needs to be changed.
Mark?
I did have two, can I bring
Yes.
these in? Two, I think they're fairly minor editing. On page 5, the paragraph, the paragraph at the bottom, it discusses, it uses the term regulatory burden. I would suggest a more neutral term, say regulatory requirements, because we've already talked in the prior sentence about, what were the effects of strategies on the efficiency of housing markets. So I consider that a sort of a pejorative term. So that was I know, I'm recognizing what the point was that was made, but just phrasing it a little more neutral would be my
Dennis?
suggestion there.
You're the father of that phrase.
I know. I can
Okay.
live with the change.
All right.
Okay. The next one was on page 7. This was more of a question about reviewing ADU regulations. It says consider clemency program to legalize existing ADUs, and I thought they were already legal in Kenmore. Am I missing?
So what
Something-
clemency programs are is people may have ADUs that were not permitted. It's very common. And so a clemency program is to say, we're not going to ask questions that you have it now if you come in, and that's what a clemency program is about.
Okay, so there are ADUs that were I guess, went in either without the city's knowledge or
Correct.
permission, even
Correct.
though the city has, Debbie, how long have ADUs been allowed in Kenmore? Has it been-
But there are rules about what it takes to have a legally permitted ADU under the code.
You have to get a permit.
Okay,
A lot of people do it without a
I
permit.
didn't realize that,
Right.
okay. Okay.
And to get
Because
the
there's
permit,
rules
you have
about
to-
size and so that, design, I don't know if their city is, so there's
Separation.
provisions and stuff.
Separate entrance.
Gotcha.
Locked door
Okay.
between the primary portion of
Insulation,
the
fire
residence.
capabilities.
It makes sense, gotcha, okay, thank you.
Thanks for bringing that up, though. So, because that was one of the other things was nagging at me. What is that other thing? On page 7, we have our 4 top-tier recommendations. And 2 things. One, was this the order of preference? Are these in order of preference? I thought ADUs was our favorite.
I don't know that we made an order of the top 4, I think we just had 4,
I think it just was.
Yeah.
the final 4 with no.
Do we want to do that? Do we want to say, like, ADU first? And because I looked at the first one, and it's a little vague. I'm thinking, okay, how does that work? Density transfers from affordable properties to areas where additional density has been proposed? I'm like, gosh.
I think what we were trying to do was keep the flow for affordability for the largest amount of our population segment. That's might be why it's kind of vague.
I think they're in the order.
Are they in the
You picked the
order
first
that?
2 and then the last 2, and we did not attempt to, and I think when you're down to 4, I'm not.
We just
All right.
said put them in.
Nobody has a preference for ordering these?
You might mention that. We could just say these are not in a strategic order based on highest priority. They're just the 4 contenders.
Dennis?
I'm not sure we voted on it in terms of order of priority, and I'm thinking that the order that we have here is simply the order in which the matrix displays it.
Okay. Is that true?
It was the first 2 that made the cut,
And then this,
and they're in order. And then the next 2 you added.
and they're in order.
Oh, yeah, because we voted 2
Right.
times.
Right.
Okay.
So they are in order.
So they're just kind of 2 different segments that we worked on. I get it.
Can you, Arthur, briefly explain, or Mike, number 1?
Well, I think the key is towards the end there, which is manufactured housing was one of the concerns and why it was timely and things, because they're always imminently threatened potentially with redevelopment. So, but that was one of the examples. But I think the main is consider strategies for preserving existing affordable housing. That's the statement. The rest is just an example. And the example, I think, highlights why, one of the reasons why you made it a high priority, which is if a building goes or community goes away, you can't bring it back. And it felt like there's probably some of, especially the manufactured housing, where that threat feels like it might be out there the longer you wait.
Can you remind me on density transfers, how that works? We got it in here twice, top one and the bottom one.
So on the top one is, that could be for manufactured housing, where you're saying, wow, the building's on here is an old garden-style apartment, and we're now allowing the increase. And how could you maybe give some value to that property of the potential extra that it's not using? So
You're talking about density?
Yeah.
Allowance?
Right.
Okay, so you said garden-style apartments with high density.
No, those would be lower density compared to what's now allowed, because they might be at 20 units to the acre.
Okay.
And your center area is now allowing over 100 units per acre. So the point is, you might say, if you agree not to redevelop, you could transfer some of that density
Yeah,
onto another parcel.
the
So
extra
you would
80 units
to somewhere else.
you sell.
Right.
Well, where are you selling it? To a place that can have that level of density?
Right.
What are
So-
they getting if they already have that level of density?
You might sell another, you can set up a system in which, for example, right now in Sammamish,
Yeah,
they changed their zoning and they went up a certain amount.
yeah.
And for one part of the city. But then they left extra density, they said, we still haven't gone the full density that we may think is okay. And the only way you get that extra density is you buy it or you give us affordable units. You give us more affordable units and we'll let you go even higher. So this is just a wrinkle on a concept like that. You don't have that in place now. You'd have to do some things to make it work. But the concept is just like with open space transfer development rights, right? You take an area and you say, if you don't develop, you can sell it to an area where someone's allowed to build more than what the current zoning allows.
So they get more than what is
Yes,
zoned.
yeah.
It's like a development agreement or something?
It's an incentive.
Well,
Well, I get that, but it's,
how would you do it? I mean, there would
these are
typically
two
need...
private property owners.
Right.
But there's a law now that we're saying the city might consider passing that says one can sell its density, unused density, to another.
This was just an example.
Yeah.
Just like some city, I think where it's more commonly used today
Yeah.
is with open space preservation. So Redmond has that. I think Bellevue has that in some areas. I'm not sure about Bellevue, but Issaquah has it. And so it's the same concept there, but there you would be using it for a housing that's at below its allowed density. In order to not go to its allowed density, you would somehow create an exchange system.
All right.
So both of those where it's mentioned are ways of preserving something
Right.
or enhancing the use of a land area.
Yeah, and I get that, and that's, I like it. I'm okay with it.
It still
I
has
think
to
there's
do...
a big gap between theory and practice on
Oh,
this.
and that's where we need lots of stakeholders to sort of
Yeah,
help
can you
work it through.
imagine next door, you're thinking you're
But-
in a, you know,
But again, we're in a process, so we're just...
that's it.
That's
why
why,
I know
that's,
we're not,
that's why those were in there,
Wrestling with the
because
details, right.
when we went through that discussion, we realized
yeah,
it has to be put forward to the council so that they begin to
yeah,
put those,
yeah. I hear you.
yeah.
Okay. And then I wanted the last thing.
And just to add, one reason the examples are like what you see here,
Yeah.
preservation might be, let's target our trust fund to go buy existing properties, but that's direct assistance.
Right,
So the examples here are trying to be more land use related.
right.
There may be other strategies that are more direct assistance
And the
related.
council can look at those.
Right.
And hopefully, and I just want to add, my hope is that these 4 examples are things that each of you might want to talk about. So we get that
Okay.
team effort when we present. So I could talk about the context, which I've obviously got to, consider very important. I think you guys really are focused on these priorities and tiers, and so I would think it'd be really suitable for you, Carol, and Dennis, and each of you to pick one of the 4 and say, here's what this is. This is what it means. Does that make sense?
You want to assign them?
Well, I just want you
Or-
guys
or do you
to
wanna
like
pick
what
them?
you like,
Do
you
we
have
need to
pre-
make a decision right now?
No,
Would that
I
be the
think, let's
most?
just think about which
Okay.
of these you kind of like, and then next meeting we can
Okay,
air it out, because it's already 8:39.
okay.
Sound good?
Homework.
Sort of.
I got you.
Anything else? No? All right, Debbie? I'll send you an email. I'll copy everybody.
Okay, I was going to recommend that you do
Yeah.
that.
Oh, yeah.
So we won't respond.
Don't
We
respond to
won't- we
me.
won't
You can
respond until the
respond to
meeting.
staff. Can't we do that? OPMA, don't, respond to me, but you can send an email copying me and say, well, I want to do this
So,
instead.
so you're going to send everybody this document to Debbie?
Right.
And if we have any additional comments, we can send them to Debbie?
I think that works. Yeah,
So,
well, I'll get it out the next day or 2.
so you're definitely going to hit the deck running, and we'll tag team you?
Does that work?
Yeah, it does.
Debbie, that meets the OPMA if they send their comments to you in response to what I send to you, right? That's not a rolling meeting. I don't think it is. I think we've been there before. Double check if you could on that.
Could we
Yeah.
also make comments at the 17th meeting?
Absolutely.
Would
This
that
is
be-
trying
Would
to-
that be easier? I don't know, what's easier?
could.
From a process
Well-
standpoint, to get it ready for the council?
Except that if you have to make changes, will it be ready for the 23rd then? Okay. So basically, we will not be able to discuss these changes again. We just need to give our recommendations to you.
Well, but what I've got to try and figure out is what I can put in the agenda package and say, here's provided on the 18th or on the
Okay.
19th.
Okay.
Relate to the council. Don't like to do, but I don't really see a way around it at this point.
Unless we had a special meeting. So my hope was, if we send emails to Debbie, I send mine, you guys look at it, you go, that guy's an idiot, and you go, Debbie, ignore that, which is okay.
I don't
In
think
small
we'll be doing
doses.
that, Doug.
And so at least we get sort of a jump on what we would talk about. We can't talk between each other, but she would know, we'd all know where we stand, so that at the 17th, we can agree on it. And what tweaks she would have to make maybe could be done in the time for the 23rd.
At this point, I'm looking at this and it's not really, focus you've been making is more editorial, more adding policy directions, adding any new information other than really reorganizing what information we have. That's how I'm looking at this, because I don't think really changing the direction of the recommendation. This is on the context,
Right.
the background, this is really trying to figure out what to, how to describe what the recommendation is.
Mark?
I'm still confused. So we'll get something on the 17th that will reflect what you send, that what we all send to Debbie individually, and then we'll take a final look at it, and that's what we send
Can you
to
tweak what?
council. Is that,
Can
I'm
you
just
tweak
trying to
it
make
out?
sure I
Yeah,
understand the
I think I know where you're coming.
process.
So you give us something after you get our emails. See it, we sit down on the 17th. Can you tweak it after that?
That's not, I have to be really, really minor about
Right.
it. I really want to get it to council, I'm going to be late to council anyway with that.
Okay.
I'm hoping that, again, I think we kind of recognize it's not perfect. My
Yep.
concern is that the recommendation is we're on board with the recommendation, and the rest of it is hopefully on the 17th, we will have a document completely satisfied with the context of that.
So are we do we think we're close enough tonight to go with that, or do you want to have a special meeting? It would be pretty short, I think. We could do it on maybe the 10th or something. Are we close?
I feel like we're close.
Okay. And I think we are too, unless there's a hidden,
I don't think we're really changing the context other than rearranging it and maybe wordsmithing it. I don't think the actual nuggets that are in there are a whole lot different.
and I'm going to, it's going to be about, okay, Arch, describe yourself. That's going to be new. You guys know where I stand. I know I feel more strongly than others, but I do think there's agreement. We got to do more with it. That would be the only really new thing.
Okay.
And I'm not looking to,
All I hope for not to be honest with is adding in the sentence or maybe two about the trust fund.
Yeah.
Because the description
To the footnotes.
really provided a good overview of what
Yeah.
that's done. So I wasn't thinking it would be a huge focus on art, other than maybe adding more sentences.
I think that can work. And maybe we, you see that handout you gave us tonight? It talks about who contributes what. It would be worth making an appendix out of it. I like it.
We can, I mean, again, we've just been talking about having this document in more concise and focused.
It's an appendix.
A piece of it, and I can chat with Mike now about what they would add as a sentence onto that.
We add the sentence, and then on page, I think it's the second page of the handout, Arch Parity Program Goals, Annual Commitments, Annual Average. Instead of the whole thing, that to me was the most telling document. How much is each city giving to Arch? Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe it's not the most telling document. But I thought it was interesting. Here, Kenmore's given in the last 5 years 1.524 million. Bothel's 1.2. Bothel's housing prices are higher. Bothel's got far more residents. Thinking we're doing pretty good there. Woodinville's given 520,000.
Their population is half ours, though.
Yeah?
It is, they're rural.
Contribution's 1/3, and their housing prices are a lot higher.
They are, but they're little estates. They actually are bigger chunks of land than the housing in here.
My point is, they've got a bigger problem with housing affordability than we do. And they're not even giving a pro rata share of their population.
So I will comment that
Yeah.
this is direct assistance. The council does get this report. We're happy to attach it as in fact, they will be getting this as part of the direct assistance conversation.
Okay.
But I think the councils are the ones who came up with the formulas, and which are the goals. And there is a lot more to it than just looking at some single numbers.
Do you think it's helpful?
As I said,
Oops, I'm sorry. When we get to direct assistance, this presumably, because we gave this to, I think your council got this memo a year ago. We had a big meeting with council representatives, and there was follow-up. Some of the council members, all the council members got it. I can't remember. But when they do direct assistance, this is the type of information that we provide them consistently.
Yeah, so, and this goes to, our audience is not just the city council, it's the public at large, we're a public body, it's a public hearing. I like having this and telling the public, these are the numbers. These are some of the numbers. Maybe there's a better snapshot than this, but it's nice, I think it's helpful to know what Arch does, to see these kind of numbers and know to the extent to which each city contributes and how much we're talking about. I mean, that's part of that point I'm making. It sounds to me like this is the trust fund. That's my biggest concern is there's this money going around.
Just as we provided you some background information to talk about your strategies, this is a basic document we typically give the councils as part of their background when they talk about direct assistance.
Right, and so it's the kind of thing I think would help inform the public if they're looking at what we did here to say this is who's advising the commission.
Arthur, could you distinguish for me the difference between CDBG, general fund, and other?
Sure. CDBG is a federal funding program that can be used for various different purposes, benefiting low and moderate income persons and households. And so CDBG is what we often refer to as a federal pass-through in which local jurisdictions have some level of control on how much it goes to housing versus other uses. So the CDBG are those CDBG funds that are used specifically for housing. General fund are what's coming from cities' general fund budgets. Other are other activities that cities undertake that result in direct assistance for affordable housing. More times than not, it has been land donations and it has been fee waivers for specific projects. So you have, I don't know if it's in the report yet, but you did some fee waivers for the project across the street. So that would show up in that calculation. Other ways is sometimes in some cities, Kirkland probably most notably, there are times when builders have to provide affordable housing through zoning codes where the city will allow a cash payment instead. Pretty limited usually. So that's another example of other. So it's other ways, and the whole idea behind parity was, when the councils got together, is let's have a system that encourages us to be creative and not just think it always has to be cash from our general fund. So that's why when you look at that, you'll see certain cities, all of a sudden you see a huge blip. It's because they probably made a land donation that year, which can be a very valuable contribution to a project if it's done.
So Arthur, it says formulas used to establish each city's range are based on several factors. 1, current population. 2, projected housing growth. 3, projected job growth.
Yes.
What about affordability? Because affordability.
Well, keep in mind that the affordability goals were for 20 years based on a percentage of your growth target. So therefore, using the housing target directly correlated to your affordable housing target goals.
Yeah, I get that.
So that did correlate to affordability. So this formula was developed by council members, not staff. sitting around. We gave them about 6 or 7 different things they could think about, and those are the 3 that they picked. With unanimous consensus of all the cities who were, I don't know if Kenmore was quite a member yet. Can't remember if they were part of the work group, but it was city council members sitting around a table saying if we're going to have and again, that formula is only advisory. The councils wanted something to know based on some perspective. How would we know where we stand relative to other jurisdictions who were in the Arch if we had an overall goal? And that was a request of some of the cities after about 4 or 5 years. Before then, whatever, your dollars, you put up what you want, and some of the members asked for that. Arch didn't ask for it. Staff didn't ask for it. And so they went through about a year-long process of meeting and talking, and council members actually came up, we gave them all these formulas, and a council member came up with the formula that we ultimately used. The other council members liked it, and then we put this report together, went to all the councils, and every council voted on it and said that it still doesn't mandate anything. It's just here.
Yeah.
You want to make, as you're deliberating over what to set aside or how to make contributions, here's something you guys asked for as one thing to look at.
So you're saying you guys didn't come up with a formula, the city councils did, so I'm not criticizing Arch for this, but it seems to me that if a community has a bigger problem with housing affordability, they would make a bigger contribution.
So, and all I can tell you is all the council members put all of their perspectives on the table, and they came to consensus that this was the way to look at the issue.
I'm not
It's kind of like,
making you the target of this.
I'm letting you know that you're putting the councils on target for that, yes.
it's kind of like having 2 households that live next door to each other, and they all have 4 kids. Each family has 4 kids. But what they put in their budget to educate and prepare their kids 20 years later to be able to be income-producing, productive members of society, their individual goals of how they're going to steward their finances would be local in the home. It's not uniform. Same thing with the cities. They all have a different vision and goal, and their reasons for setting aside certain amount of money towards this part of representing or caring for their citizens will be different. I mean, Woodinville's vision has so changed in the last 5 years, and for sure in the last 20 years, when they were mostly farmers, when you think about it. And their population hasn't grown like the rest of the cities.
But they have a big employment base, which is why their high end is based on their employment growth targets.
Yeah, it's also a much bigger economy.
They
I mean,
do,
part of which is employment-based. They have a much bigger retail sector,
and so to some
restaurant
extent,
sector.
that's how, again, the wisdom of the policymakers, the elected representatives of all the cities got around a table, and this is what they thought was most fair. Again, with the caveat, let's have lows and highs, let's have them be aspirational, you're not going to get penalized, it's not part of the membership. You will see no reference to parity in the Arch interlocal agreement.
Thanks for the answer. All right, anybody else? Any new business? There being none, I hereby adjourn this meeting.